All right, so we are here for the, cut the transcript so I don't have to read myself talk. We are here for the third Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting for the amendment rulemaking, and it is April 29th, 2025. Let me share my screen here. There we go. So hopefully you can see this. I kind of wanted to set it up to where I could have the slideshow, but then also have the text up at the same time and not have to constantly go back and forth between the two. So can you guys see both of them okay? Thumbs up from David. Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, first I thought I'd go over the current state of the rulemaking, kind of where we're at, and then we're going to get right into the draft rules, and that's basically going to be the bulk of the meeting here, and then there'll be a public comment opportunity if anybody joins us, at which point we will discuss next steps. So in terms of the current state, we kind of entered we exited the last RAC meeting having kind of discussed all the major issues, and there were some comments and thoughts about where we should take that. We then, staff, got to work sort of developing proposed draft language for all of that, which we're going to go over today. But of course, we hit the legislative session and the busy season for a lot of folks. So things did push out a little bit more than I had maybe intended. Sarah, okay. But here we are. We have completed some draft language, and I sent that to you last week. And there'll be an opportunity after this meeting to sort of review it in more detail based on comments that you are presented to today by your fellow RAC members. And I will, I'll probably give like 2 weeks to give me some feedback, and then we'll take that to develop the draft that will likely be used for the notice of proposed rulemaking. If there's some sort of major disagreements that we think could be resolved by another RAC meeting, we will do so. But I suspect, based on how the last meeting went and the changes that the proposed changes that we've done today, that any disagreements with respect to particular points would not be helpful to continue to hold additional RACs to discuss them, and that it would be better to just get into the public comment period, and then if people want to make additional comments or let their voice be heard to council about directions that they wish we had taken this, I would encourage you to do so. Yeah, we are in here still, just the second box here, development of draft proposed rules. Hopefully we are hopefully at the tail end of this, at which point we would go into kind of a 3-month notice period, which would then result in adoption of rules. I don't know, May, June, July, somewhere like August, September, somewhere around there is when these would potentially go into effect if we don't hold an additional RAC meeting. So just as a reminder, the scope of this rulemaking is primarily focused on Division 27, although we've made a couple of minor tweaks to some other division rules just to reflect the updates we've made here. And we have 3 main objectives here, and just think about these as we go over the proposed changes. The first one is, and sort of the one I always like to focus on, is improve the clarity of the rules by resolving sort of ambiguities or confusing language. And if you feel like we're not doing that, or we're introducing confusion, then definitely let us know. And then also, we've kind of learned some lessons. These rules were heavily revised in 2017, and then sort of went through some iterations before they actually became final. But we've learned some things since then about what's worked. So these proposed rules or revisions reflect those lessons. And then obviously we've had some legislation and other rules and some direction from the courts that have resulted in us making some tweaks. The main one that comes to mind is the Supreme Court holding that any change in the boundary is a mandatory amendment. So that was not in the rules before, but we're going to change that here with the draft language to reflect that court holding. So any questions about just kind of the general scope, or are we all ready to get into it? Okay, let's do it. So I have sort of organized this sort of overview of the rules to just be top to bottom. I might scroll past some changes, some like minor changes, and if you see something, you want me to stop or whatever, go back. We can do that. But so I'm just gonna we're gonna start here in Rule 110, which deals with and 115, which sort of relate to partial termination of a site certificate. So, and I guess maybe I proposed a question to the RAC here. 115 is it sort of standalone rule that proposed a sort of process for partial retirement of a facility. So there's some track changes in here, but they're actually sort of track changes on our track changes. This would be a whole new rule. The alternative proposal would be to essentially acknowledge that it's largely going to be the same as the existing process and just sort of stick a section here, section 10 on the tail end of 110, which basically just says a certificate holder may release a portion of the site by doing basically what you do above for a total termination. And then once that partial retirement would be complete, the council would then issue an updated site certificate. So if people feel like some of the tweaks we've made down here are helpful or whatever, I think it might make sense to sort of expound that rather than try to stick a giant section at the end of the previous one. But if the consensus is this is sort of not really all that different, doesn't merit its own rule, then I'm inclined to go with the option of just having this section 10 here at the end of 110. I don't know if anybody has any feelings. David, you unmuted or no?
Oh, no, I always
you're just left it off.
Forget.
Okay, you kind of got the body language. I was like, oh, got a thought. No. Okay.
Go
ahead.
Well, the only thing it can be either. That I think this is important to be able to actually, in a sense, close off a portion of a site. There can be lots of reasons for it. We all know that we often phase projects in, and certainly if the next phase isn't going forward, you'd want to retract the site boundary, etc., for compliance and all kinds of reasons. So for me, it doesn't, maybe some additional steps is good, but probably the first paragraph is enough. But that's just my thought.
Okay. Irene, you have a thought?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My one concern just generally with the retirement plan, I support the idea of using the same basically criteria as you use for the final, but there seems to be a lack of any kind of indication of monitoring prior to the close of the site certificate. And the concern primarily has to do with habitat restoration and whether or not that's actually been done. I mean, it's actually been effective. So I think that ought to somehow be incorporated into this rule.
Well, the habitat restoration stuff is part of the original the conditions of the original site certificate. So to the extent that you're implementing this process for a partial termination, as it says, you would follow the steps above, which includes identifying, for example, the steps someone would take to restore the site to a useful non-hazardous condition and how it would impact fish, wildlife, and the environment. So that's sort of already included in the process. But then again, that's sort of lost when you just say do the above. So I could see how that you might be a little confused about that.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my comment.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll think about this some more, and then maybe pick one of the two, and then once you see the final sort of noticed version, you can share some public comment thoughts or during the public comment period if you still feel strongly about it. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about the amendment determination request. Just pull up the. $350. Like there's before this. Okay. So previously we've had type A and type B, and we've had quite a few type A and type B. And this was a slide I had before that sort of we developed. I showed you during our second RAC, where we sort of looked at, I mean, is type B even any shorter? And it is shorter, average duration 6 months, although these averages sort of mask the fact that the duration varies wildly for both type A and type B. But type B is on average shorter. However, it's not clear that it's really shorter because it's type B or just because it qualified for type B. In other words, if it went through the type A process, maybe it would have been just a short, because by its nature, the stuff that qualifies for type B is less complicated. So we sort of took a look at this and went back and forth on this. You know, there's arguments for and arguments against. But then when we really looked at like what the differences are between these two types, you know, there's really two key differences. One of them is a public hearing for type A and also the contested case possibility for type A, and type B has neither of those. So the kind of solution here was, well, let's just get rid of this. Doing the determination between type A and type B does take time, money, and resources. Let's just have, you know, one type. The idea behind this made sense at the time, and it still makes sense theoretically, but ultimately, you know, everything sort of has to meet the same standard. And if something's less complicated, it probably will be, you know, shoot through the whole process quicker anyway. And then the proposal here is to just always have public hearings. But as you'll see, as we'll discuss below, eliminate the possibility of contested case for amendments. So I don't want to get into the substance of the contested case situation for a minute, but assuming we did get rid of the contested case, as we currently proposed, is the RAC following me that it doesn't really make sense to spend the time to figure out, are you type A or type B? And then, you know, if we just streamline the process for everybody, then it doesn't, I mean, theoretically, it shouldn't matter. The process should just move quicker for easier amendments. Andrew, you up and down there? No? Okay. Emily?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I was trying to find the thumbs up, but
yeah,
the clap. Yeah, we would prefer that if it was just a single process and new opportunity for contested case. That just would really streamline the process.
Okay, Emily?
Okay, that may have answered my question, because I think the previous proposal was to shorten the type A review period from 60 to 30 days, or maybe that was just a Renewable Northwest recommendation. But so is this also shortening the time period by, you think, an equivalent?
Well, I mean, to sort of pull back the curtain on that specific issue, there was a lot of back and forth amongst the staff who reviewed this language. And there is a sort of two camps of thought. One of them is, you know, set an aggressive a timeline as we can. But and the other camp is, if we're always going to blow past that, because the timeline is, you know, do it this fast unless it takes longer. And so if it's always going to take longer, why have a shorter timeline? But I mean, to go back to the first camp a little bit, there is a sort of reality that if you have 60 days to do something, you know, odds are you're going to take 60 days to do something, just because it's, you know, it's not the squeaky wheel. You know, you have other things that have a shorter timeline. So by sort of formalizing a shorter timeline, we would increase the likelihood that we would get through this stuff quicker, because it would be prioritized over other stuff rather than having to, you know, extend the time. I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to talk particularly about this issue of time or length, but I'm sort of 6 and 1/2 dozen the other about changing the time. I do think regardless, we should try to make the process as streamlined as possible, regardless of sort of what the official timeline is.
Yeah, and I guess I don't have too much more to add, but I thought, yeah, I mean, like, because of the new process to supersede what would otherwise be a contested case, that it's kind of just a different discussion.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe if you have
some timeline, but
yeah. So we don't necessarily need to figure that out right this second, but maybe think about that. And if you have strong feelings one way or the other, you can, let us know.
I wouldn't mind though, just running through what that means. I get that it took time to do A and B. We've done that before, but I guess where does the really small thing like a same parent company, different LLC come into play? Seriously, that's one of the things that I was trying to, like, the truly administrative things, and then have to have a public hearing, which means that you have to have a certain amount of time to send out the public notice, and then you have to do everything. That,
I mean, the transfer process would still exist.
yeah, but that's transfer usually means though when it's you're transferring ownership from one parent to another parent company, right?
Depends. I mean, I think for NextEra, we've had some more conservative situations where no change in parent, but LLC resulted in a transfer. And so that if it were an LLC change, no change in parent company, we would treat that as a transfer.
Right.
In the same way. And And I mean, it's going to take a long time to get there, just given the time of the process, but we're really trying to make sure that, the way the site certificate is written and the way that conditions are written don't trap everyone in an amendment process when it's, like my favorite example is a change of 6 feet in the minimum blade tip clearance,
we had
applied the amendment process. And so, you learn over time what conditions with specificity are needed versus those that don't. But then, and I'm sure Tom will get there, but still, like, the process, if an amendment is triggered and it's pretty simple. And I mean, even we're about to have some amendments here soon that are just a change of a condition where the condition didn't work, but technically they're in non-compliance. And I mean, that should go very quickly. And I would think with this new process, I mean, if there are no commenters and there's not that much for Odo FSEC to review, it would go faster than what, the type B process offers now.
Okay.
Or in a similar schedule.
Yeah. I get the notion. My only follow-up would be, and maybe it's a resource thing, but having more frequent, like, actual hearing dates and but that's maybe outside of this, but it's just one of the things as you adhere and you get more and more projects that, and I know that's a resource thing and all the way up through Odo as well, not just FSEC, but maybe we'll make a comment more on that just as we're going along. But it's fine as long as you can get the resources and get the meetings held and the public hearings held. Then you don't want it to be keep going down the line, I guess, is the only part about that is nice about having the trigger. But you're right. Sometimes it took as long to figure out whether it was A or B, or almost as long as it did to just get in the process. So that I agree with. So we'll make a comment about resources later.
Yeah. Okay. I think my inclination is, to the extent possible, allowed by statute, if something is truly de minimis, then it shouldn't be an amendment to begin with. So, if it's like, if we're going to trigger the amendment process, either because we're required to by statute, like where the Supreme Court said, if you change the boundaries, you're going to have to do an amendment. So, I mean, that's the way that's the way that cookie crumbles. But to the extent there's any sort of flexibility, and we've identified, well, these sorts of changes don't merit the amendment process because we don't need to do this extensive review and we don't need a public hearing, Therefore, it shouldn't be an amendment, it should just be a separate type of change. But then if it does trigger an amendment, then rather than have to say, well, does this merit a public hearing or not? Because then that's its own review that takes time. Just automatically have it. So yeah, it's a sort of balance between, the more flexible you are, the more you have to exert sort of cognitive load to navigate the flexibility. But also we don't want to just have automatic, burdens all over the place just so we don't have to do any thinking. So it's just sort of a balance. So if you have any thoughts about where we've landed on that, absolutely let those thoughts be heard. Irene.
Yeah. In practicality, amendments haven't been allowing contested cases anyway. However, the removal of any potential for a contested case on amendments, some of those amendments are more significant than the original site certificate application. The changes that are being made through amendments are just unbelievable at times. And I know that there's a bill that will apply to a lot of these things, assuming it does pass, saying that everything's going to go to the Oregon Supreme Court. But when you start denying contested cases, you really get into the Constitution and number 5 and number 14 of the Constitution say you have a right to due process. And I have a question about whether or not people are being allowed due process because of the definition saying that you have a right to things like discovery, interviewing people, which is not being provided. I don't know how that balance is going to happen between FSAC and the Supreme Court when FSAC is not allowing any contested cases in-house. But I just think I see there are going to be a lot of problems with not allowing any public hearings on major changes. It's just a comment.
I mean, so there is a public hearing. I mean, we're talking about having mandatory public hearings, but let's get to the contested case issue here in a minute, or we will. So just hold that thought for a second. So we don't have to necessarily come to any conclusions on this particular issue here, but I just wanted to flag it for you. And if you think you might have thoughts about this, write this down as something to share in the next week or so with the group. So let's move on to the pre-amendment conference. 359 here. I'm scrolling past stuff that's related to the AB stuff. Okay, so as you can see, we just yoinked it out here. I know there were some concerns before about feeling like it did have some value, but the goal here is to sort of not have automatic stuff all the time, where possible. And obviously, to the extent that an applicant has concerns about, the project or notice of intent or whatever, they're more than welcome to reach out to and say, hey, let's have a meeting or whatever. But just as a matter of course, requiring a pre-amendment conference, it may not be needed based on if something is really simple. So this, I feel like, sort of goes exactly to David's point. This doesn't prevent you from sort of meeting with the department to discuss your project. It's just that we don't want to always require something when it's not always needed. And then along with that, provide some tweaks. We tweak some language here in 360 to sort of better define what an analysis area is, which is one of the big questions that's resolved or attempted to be resolved at that pre-amendment or conference. So if there's a little bit more direction on what that should look like, and then also making it clear the department can, tweak that to fit the specific project, I think that sort of addresses maybe some concerns about, giving out that automatic conference. Sarah, you have? Oh, sorry, David, you raised your hand first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say I like this. But we would often do, I know, individuals, but you can still reach out. But not having it a mandatory is good, and having a little bit more direction on what types of things to make sure that we're doing is, I think, also good. So that's all I want to say.
Okay. Sarah?
And will you go back to the language is currently in, 0359? Yeah, so this, I just wanted to clarify, this was a may, not a shall. It wasn't a mandatory, you have to come have a pre-amendment conference, but the rule of the language was that this is where, the prior to submitting an amendment, if a certificate holder and their consultants wanted to meet with us, we were supposed to be able to establish whether analysis areas could change. But that was before we had received it. And so that was another thing that the revisions are trying to address. It is much easier to really evaluate the question that was allowed in this 0359 once we have information. So I just kind of wanted to clarify, it wasn't required. It was an option because you could just, maybe nobody needs to talk to us. They're just moving forward. Anyway.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Irene?
Yeah, I think the thing that's getting lost here is the idea that when you're looking at the analysis area, or whatever you want to call it, the fact that it needs to include the area where the impacts are going to occur, and that may actually be beyond the site boundary or beyond the analysis or study area. So somewhere in this rule, I think it should say that the area is to include the area where actual impacts are going to occur. And I'm thinking about things like noise or, just anything where impacts go beyond where the actual facility is located.
So, and that's a good point. It maybe is captured here in this paragraph C here, where it's based on the project order, if not the study area for the original project, if there was no project order, but then it's modified to reflect the actual portions of the site boundary subject to the amendment request. So to the extent that the project is changing shape, then it would extend to include that as well. And then, but then also it goes the other way too. So if somebody wants to build and we put this example in the rules just to make it clear what we're intending here. The typical example would be that if you wanted to amend the site to include a transmission line, and transmission line shoots off, 30 miles that way, you don't need to restudy the whole thing that it's connected to. That's not changing at all. So, to the extent it makes sense, we don't need to restudy the stuff that's not changing. So we're trying to capture, growth, but exclude stuff if it doesn't make sense to include it. So I think that's hopefully captured, but I mean, I don't know. Does the RAC feel like the extend from the portions which are subject to the amendment requests captures Irene's concern, or could there be some amendments that wouldn't necessarily change the site boundary, but would require, you still have to meet any changes you make related to supporting components still have to meet the standards. So if you're changing a component of the project in the boundary, it would still have to comply with, all of the council standards. So I feel like we're okay. I don't know, Patrick, do you have are you following this? Okay.
Sorry, had to get to my microphone. I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. All right. Well, hearing nothing, I'm going to go to the next slide. So there's concern about the sort of clarity of the information requirements. Oh yeah, we just talked about this. So this was the sort of two issues. One was the pre-amendment conference, and then the other one was the clarity on the analysis areas. So, and And then lastly, just if you didn't notice, we sort of tweaked the information submission requirements to specifically eliminate incorporate by reference, because if that's allowed, like, why wouldn't you do it? But the reality is that, especially for members of the public, like, it's almost impossible to like locate what you're referring to, or you certainly as a burden that we don't necessarily want to impose on them, or even really the staff to go down and track down what's being relied upon. So that, and I think I spoke on this previously, but to the extent that you are just incorporating it, or you would have incorporated it, there's nothing stopping you from just like copying and pasting, or including it as an attachment even, right? So, and then referring to that, but it can't just be a footnote to a mysterious document that's in the ether. So does that make sense? Everybody? Okay. All right.
And Tom, can I just add to that
Sure.
For certificate holders, and I'm not exactly sure who's on the line. I know Nextera and Northwest Natural, and then I don't know how close those representatives are to the documentations the consultants prepare. But one of the things this is, trying to get at too, is an approach that really has been used for the last 10 years, where in the amendment process, an amendment would say, this change that I'm proposing is similar to or less than in impact to what council previously approved. So council may rely on those previous findings. And, we're basically saying, like, what does that mean? Like, you have to, what is this change? And if council's prior analysis is still valid, those facts still remain true, we do want you to bring them forward, rather than just saying, which when we actually go down that path, what did council previously review and rely on? We're like, it's not there. It doesn't make sense. And it's taking quite a bit of work for us to do that, which suggests to us that then the work kind of wasn't done to substantiate the statement that this is the same as what was previously reviewed. So I'm just wanting to make sure, that there's an understanding that this is going to increase the level of effort to prepare an amendment. So just to be noted.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good note. Just trying to follow that. So in practical terms, you would, in a sense, say what's new, but then you would actually say what is all, like, actually spell it out of what was originally, whether it be not just the footnote, right? But actually discuss. We might have things in the appendix or attachments that you could point to directly, but you'd want to, in a sense, the story of what was already approved and what stays the same, so that it's right there for both you as staff and for the council to review, sort of right up front.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
It's
you.
like you bring it forward and then validate that it's still true, rather than just the statement. And then, there's going to be 50% of the time it's not true anymore. Substantively, it's not shaking out to be huge, but the facts and the sources have changed, so that then that prior analysis changes.
We're basically just asking, show your work. And
right.
Yeah. Irene.
Yeah, from a public perspective, I absolutely support this change, because, the way it is right now, you have to basically have an original site certificate in every amendment from the very beginning to deal with Amendment 10, because it's referencing back to a bunch of information that isn't right before you. So I can see why the council has a terrible time with it. Certainly the public has at least as hard a time, or more so.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not easy to access that original information. So thank you.
Yeah. Irene, just to that point, I agree. It's telling the story up front. It's probably good for all of us to get used to doing that.
And it's, it's entirely possible that nothing really has changed. And so it shouldn't take that long to do that. But to just take the time and say, this is the evidence that was relied on before. There's no newer evidence. And these changes are,
The agencies are changing stuff all over the place. I mean, it's actually getting pretty complicated. I would,
but
so
Yeah,
yeah,
that
so
that
there-
that,
so-
that part
or-
is
yeah.
yeah.
that's true. Because we have to bring
Or
in
there
all
is
the
new
new
evidence.
stuff, but it's telling the story.
But-
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. But the new, we relied on this 2023 report, and now we're relying on the 2025 report, but the 2025 report isn't really that different than the 2023 report. So, but you just got to show your work.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay. All right. So now we get down to the contested case one. So, and this is going to directly relate to also the public comment period as well. So it's sort of it's going to affect the public comment period, which is 367 here. And then also, heavily modify, as you can see all these changes here. It's quite a bit of changes. And then here's type B, which has disappeared. And then 371 discusses the contested case, which obviously doesn't exist anymore under our proposal. So just to kind of give you a sense of, there are significant changes here. So the main concern is, and at least that I have, and I think has been expressed to me from talking to staff and others, is that there's really no value in the current process. It exists, in my mind, is sort of like, I don't want to call it a vestigial like limb, but essentially the contested case process exists. It serves a variety of functions for numerous state agencies, but a lot of those functions, there never was a public hearing, there was no public comment process. So the contested case is your only opportunity to sort of contest agency action. Whereas, we have, and as you're going to see here, are going to propose a sort of expanded opportunity for public participation with the goal of whatever you thought you were going to get out of the contested case. To the extent that that was going to provide value to counsel or value to the applicant to, have a better application or for an amendment, why not provide that value when it actually, is useful and not crazy expensive? To the extent that you are wanting to use the contested case or even the possibility of contested case is sort of just to make it harder to get an amendment so that applicants will be less likely to apply for one and just, shake their hands to the sky. I mean, we're not here to facilitate that. So I'm going to walk through a little bit here and then we can open it up for discussion. But let me go to 367 here, which is where you'll see most of the changes here. So what we're proposing here is essentially, and actually I'll just scroll down to this graph here. So what we have right now is we have the DPO and there's a comment period. And then we sort of allow applicant response. And then there's a sort of a possibility for contested case, which never seems to happen because the initial comment doesn't cause any changes. And so therefore it doesn't meet the standard. And then the appeal path is confusing because of legislation that's sort of applies generally to the state, but then also there's legislation that applies specifically to FSEC. And I just feel like this is not sort of meeting the needs of our process, especially given, I just wanted to pull this up real quick. I know, Irene, you've talked a lot about sort of the statutes that talk about the appeal process. But if you go to, I'm in ORS 469, you'll see there's a whole section here about judicial review of council actions. And, it talks about how it's only mentions the Supreme Court. It has very specific deadlines. It talks about how the Supreme Court has to prioritize on its docket any petitions for review, and they have to render a decision within 6 months. So the goal here is move things along, right? And that's the intent of this statute, is to provide some certainty to the process so that things just can't exist in the ephemeral for who knows how long. I think that's my understanding about the intent of that legislation is that you spoke of previously is trying to do, which is to the extent there was other legislation that applies generally to the state and can arguably apply to F6 process, that was not the intent here. And you can see the language here is pretty clear. So what we're proposing here, if you go back to the PowerPoint here, is a comment, the same comment period, the same length of time, and then a sort of, and these are not, these days here are not in the rules. These are just sort of estimates on what we would realistically see. Obviously, if things are super complicated, this might be 21 days and not 14. Didn't want to prescribe time limits here, but something like 2 weeks for the applicant to respond to comments. But then, and I know a lot of arguments are made and I know I've heard you make these, Irene, that your initial comment is either mischaracterized, misunderstood, or you didn't fully understand necessarily the project, or you didn't have time to develop, whatever it is. But the process that we currently have doesn't allow for that. So the idea here is this response, and it would be optional for the department, but mandatory for the applicant, would provide the original commenter with sort of a better understanding of either, hey, thanks for your comment, here's how we're going to tweak the project, or your comment is not applicable for the following reasons, which would then provide that commenter with an opportunity to fix or amend their comment, either provide missing information to clarify what the original comment referred to. Like if you said, oh, I'm aware of an endangered species, but you didn't mention it, that wouldn't rise to, you would fail the contested case test. But down here, we're going to point that out, and you'll have a chance to sort of fix that and so that we can then incorporate that into the process months and months and possibly years before a contested case might actually get to it, which is just, to me, crazy that we would want a process that would work that way when we could have a process that sort of front-loaded the information when it actually has some purpose. And then the beauty of this is we don't need a contested case, right? Which isn't really being used for anything anyway, as you pointed out, Irene. So I feel like I've explained it okay, but if there's any questions about this, I see Irene's hand is up, and I knew you were going to comment, but does anybody, I'm going to give you lots of time, Irene, but does anybody else have any thoughts about what I've suggested here with respect to these two sort of timelines I've got? All right, Irene, take it away.
Okay. The framework that I look at this kind of change under is the Supreme Court. They have to prioritize these cases, but it also says that the Supreme Court has to base their decision on the file material. And so when you eliminate a contested case, you eliminate part of what due process says that the public has an opportunity to do, which is like cross-examine people. Or when you go directly to the Supreme Court, what happens is the petitioner files their motion, the respondent responds to that motion, and then the decision is made based on the file record. So going directly to the Supreme Court, absent what's provided when a case goes through the circuit court prior to going to the Supreme Court, the circuit court actually does the full review as far as an opportunity to argue the case, so that the Supreme Court has a complete record to review. And I don't see that this process, while it's an improvement, it still is leaving off some key requirements to say that people who are impacted by these energy developments are giving an opportunity for due process. The playing field isn't equal when the primary information in the file is all about the department and FSAC justifying, or the developer justifying what they want in the site certificate without a full response from people who are saying there either needs to be more in the site certificate, more criteria, or I don't know, more information in terms of like there's no requirement for an honest response. For instance, no one is sworn in to provide honest information in an application, and that happens during a contested case. It happens during a circuit court review. Are you following that? I hope.
Yeah, and I guess my thought to that is this is not a legal proceeding like you have with the courts, and maybe Pat to this a little bit, but to the extent that we're talking about the public not having an opportunity to sort of cross-examine, the idea is that the applicant submits, I'm going to stop myself from using a loose language here, but a whole bunch of information in their application that provides enormous, extensive details in order to meet the standards. And the extent that if you spot a gap, then you should point that out, and that's your opportunity during the public comment period. But the process is not intended for you to cross-examine, as it were, the applicant. The people who are doing the cross-examining is the council. They're the ones who ask the questions of the applicant, who say, well, you said this, but we disagree, or help us understand how this makes sense, or whatever. Those are the people appointed by the governor to sort of represent the interests of the state, and that includes you. So if you spot some holes, great, point them out in the public comment period. But this process is not here for you to sort of get maximum leverage or opportunity to sort of I don't know.
Well, certainly in a 3-minute verbal, limited comment, you don't have an opportunity to do hardly anything in terms of justifying your concerns.
Well, given how complex these natures are, the nature of these applications are, I would strongly encourage anybody who had issues with an application to not rely on the oral opportunity. I think, you often do both, and I think that's totally acceptable and maybe ideal. Provide your written comments and then maybe show up and expound upon them a little bit, or make yourself available for questions to the council with respect to the comments you've made. But I think you're not really doing yourself a favor if you have concerns about, well, they didn't protect this, or the water table is threatened by these proposed changes or modifications to the land. You should probably write that up and submit it as a written comment. You don't have to, but you're sort of at the whims of the process if you're just going to show up and say a few things and then, sit down. I don't want to make light of that public hearing, but these are complex issues, and I wouldn't. And I know the council prefers being able to sit down and read people's comments and sit and think them through, and not just sort of on the spot. For that reason as well.
Yeah. I have learned over time that I need to send in things in writing, but the problem with the rule is most people in the public have one or a couple of contacts with FSAC and the department in terms of some development that's going to impact them. And so they don't understand that the importance of having their public comments be complete. And I don't think there's anything that's given to the public that would indicate to them that their entire appeal, if they choose to appeal, may very well be based on just the information that they're providing during the public comments. And, it kind of relates to one other piece, which is the fact that according to the rules, public comments end at the end of the in-person hearing. And I know that the council at one point had talked about having an opportunity for people to submit in writing for a couple of days anyway after those public hearings, because at least at the public hearing, usually people kind of cop a clue that that just saying I disagree with this because is not going to cut it.
So just to cut you off there a little bit,
Mhm.
we did actually, and I forget exactly where it is, but you'll just have to bear with me. I don't know, Patrick, we were just looking at this 2 seconds ago, but it now says no sooner than, yeah, right here. So the public hearing must be held at least 20 days after the proposed order is issued. And we added this specifically to address this issue, no less than 7 days before the end of the public comment period. So the hearing no longer represents the last date. It could be, the end of the public comment period could be a month later, it could be 10 months later or whatever it could be, but it can't be quicker than 7 days later. So there is going to be at least a week for people who show up to the hearing, maybe learn about some things they didn't know about by some other public commenters, because a lot of people do largely participate that way and maybe don't necessarily read as much as they should. So then there's now going to be a guaranteed week to then go back home and then try to find evidence or whatever and submit maybe an updated comment or a second comment or your first comment. So I do think that was a concern, and that is something hopefully we addressed here with this change here.
It's apparent to me that the rule that I reviewed is not this most recent one, so I don't know how that happened.
This is the draft that I sent out last week. So, but honestly, there's a zillion changes, which is part of the reason why we're kind of walking through this, and also why I'm going to provide some additional opportunity after this meeting for people to think things over and provide some additional comments before we sort of try to do our final push before the notice proposed rulemaking. But what you said about people not understanding is exactly why the existing process is so challenging, because the odds of somebody who's new to the process being able to sort of grasp the depth and the detail needed for their comment to actually move the needle is relatively low, even for people who are maybe somewhat familiar with sort of state agencies and regulatory processes. That's the whole point of having a sort of a mandatory response and reply opportunity, so that everybody who makes a comment gets an opportunity to understand from the department, potentially, but guaranteed from the applicant, what's, why their comment isn't sufficient for the department or for the applicant to act on. And, we're not going to burden the applicant with, or the expectation is not that they will do sort of a treatise for every single comment. If people submit sort of garbage comments, the applicant is within their right to say, there's nothing for us to work with here. There's the facts, there's the law, and there's the sort of the analysis, the connection of the two. And none of those elements are present, so we have nothing to respond to. That could be the applicant's response to 10 pages of wingdings or whatever whatever somebody could have submitted. But that would then provide somebody an opportunity to say, okay, well, let me fix that. And here's the facts, here's the law, here's the whatever. At which point the applicant would then have a SIR reply and be able to say, okay, now that they've sort of corrected their comment, here's our take on things. So the idea behind this is this will be a little bit more, it will be more cumbersome. The applicant will have sort of two, instead of sort of having the optional response before, they'll have sort of a mandatory response and a mandatory SIR reply. But of course, the SIR reply, if there is no, the public doesn't have to reply, which point there's no need for a SIR reply. And if the person's reply doesn't really change anything, the applicant's SIR reply can basically just say, see the above. So, but this does actually, to my mind, increase the odds, however small, to the extent possible, in a sort of reasonable fashion, that we get meaningful substantive comments from our public process. So, but the trade-off is sort of increased regulatory certainty. We try to get more of the stuff that's going to actually improve the process and get rid of the stuff that I think you'll agree hasn't really given us anything, right? I mean, as you said, how many contested cases for amendments have you attended, Irene?
That people, I think there've only been a couple of them approved, so
Not very often.
not very often.
Not for lack of trying. Obviously, there's something wrong here, right? There's some gap
Right.
in between the attempt at public participation and what the process is looking for. So that's kind of what we're attempting to fill here. I don't want to sort of belabor this issue here. Any additional thoughts or feelings on this? No, I mean, I'm personally excited about this change. I think it'll be positive. I think it has, will enhance our process, make it more understandable for the public, but also, we'll be able to predict with greater certainty when this process will be completed. So it won't be as much guesswork. Okay, there's just a couple other little things here. We, tried to remove hard copy filing requirements wherever possible. There's no reason for people to print stuff out when no one is looking at it, in truth.
Yeah, that's a nice little add. It actually added a bit of time at the tail end. But
yeah, you're like, oh dang, we got to print all these out. Let's cut those trees down. No one's gonna look at this. I mean, people do look at it, but they're looking at it electronically. Sarah, did you have something you want to add?
I'm sorry. Would you mind to go back to I love that graphic that you had.
This
Just
one?
had 30 seconds. Yeah. So just, and fact check me if I'm wrong, but like the second chevron, the first step at 45 days, that's like a potential, but the rule is still a 20-day minimum. And so think about this process, superseding the type A, type B, or just replacing, if that's, it, and I don't know if you touched on that, Tom, but like it could still be a pretty quick process, right? Like we wouldn't have 45 days if we had a 45-day comment period on the proposed order for this new process. If the change or the potential interest is viewed as minimal, it could be closer to 2025 at a minimum 20. And then those comment response reply, like if there's no comments, then the process just cuts off.
Sure. I guess my intent here was that whatever the comment period was previously, that's going to be the same comment period now. So the intent is not to provide any more or less public comment opportunity, with the exception of the fact that we're going to ensure that it doesn't end at the hearing, that people have a chance to provide some comments after the hearing. But then, and that may push things out a month because of how the council, because we always hold the hearings on a council meeting. So if we don't end the public comment period until at least a week after that council meeting, it can end up pushing things out an additional month. But the idea is then, you would have sort of, certainty on what the rest of the schedule would look like. I just put some time in here, but as it says here in the rule, the notice would include the following, and it would include timelines for all of this. So we would know upfront exactly when this whole thing would end, right? So as soon as the DPO started, you would know potentially when everything would be done.
And just at a practical level, the last two amendments that I've been part of did have comment period open post hearing. So it's a practice just to make sure we are getting and so it's more solidifying that that's what this looks like.
It's not like we couldn't do it now. It's just that we weren't, and now we're going to ensure that we do. Okay. Anything else on that slide, Sarah? Or
nope, all good.
Okay. Okay, we don't necessarily need to look at the rules for these, but so I'm not going to waste time scrolling. But so I just threw in some little language here, and actually, This wasn't in the draft that I submitted, but we had talked about it previously, but I didn't actually put the language in. But I just threw a sentence here in here on 367. I guess I might as well scroll to it now. Now that I realize it wasn't in that version. So 67.1. Does it talk about the actual scheduling? Oh, there's too many track changes, guys. Okay, well, now I'm not seeing it, but there is a sentence in here about the department or about the council requiring in-person hearing unless, exigent circumstances suggest that it should be remote. Andrew, you seeing it? Am I blind?
No, I just have an odd question. Is there
Oh, okay,
anything
sure.
in the rules that prevent a site certificate, either applicant or owner, to host the meeting at one of their facilities?
There's nothing in the rules that speak to it. It just says in the area.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
in the area of the project. I know that.
Yes.
That's what it says. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's too many.
And so what you were just talking about there,
Oh, this should say 375. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
it just gives that flexibility that we've sort of used during COVID. Is that enshrining the whole, like, hold in person or as otherwise sort of done by council? I've had
Snowstorm, another pandemic. Who
which
knows?
I had. I
Yeah.
had a ice storm and the people couldn't come out to sites. We had a hybrid DPO part, but yeah.
Yeah. So, because the rules do say it has to be in the area, so it's sort of awkward that it's like, well, it's really we don't want to push things back, but it's not. Wouldn't be a really good idea to do it. So, I think it is a good thing to try to have it in the area, but I mean, I think it makes some sense to codify some flexibility here. Oops. And then there's we talked about this before, but there's some just language in here about requiring the applicant to sort of prove a need for requesting extension, but like there's no need standard. So it's like if you want to get an extension, go. I mean, that's on you, right? So, but it's sort of silly that we're requiring people to sort of prove it's your project. I mean, the delays are the only harm the applicant in terms of the cost they have to bear for pushing things out. But
well, that's a condition of the marketplace too, right? We're putting millions of dollars up front to have it ready, and not everyone all at once, even though they do need power. These comes in ebbs and flows, and so that's a.
Yeah, I guess maybe I misspoke.
Did we?
Yeah.
No. I had the question, and I need to go through it all, like almost word for word again. The very first meeting we had, we talked about having a longer period of time to start construction. Have we was there any recommendations? I think it was like 3 years, and then we were trying to discuss whether it's 5 years, and then you can ask for one extension before it goes in. Like there was discussions had. Maybe I'll just have to reread everything.
Patrick, correct me if I'm
see,
wrong,
see
but
where
isn't
we
that in the
up.
legislation?
Yeah, there's legislation that would say minimum of 6 years for the start, if it passes, which probably will.
But that's legislation that's currently under review, not.
Yeah, I don't think we. Yeah. Yes, that's correct. It actually doesn't have a time here. We've just always done that. So what the legislation would do is guarantee that as a minimum. Because this has an extension sort of timeline, but it doesn't have an initial. We've just always used 3 as our initial. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. And then lastly, I had it as 410, but the sort of last minute thinking, relatively last minute, is that this language, we don't need a 410. This should just go into Division 26, which is related to the construction timeline. But essentially requiring an updated site certificate once the construction deadline is complete. So prior to that, obviously things are in flux. But then once the deadline passes, sort of providing council with, okay, here's what we actually built, so that the state, the department knows, what actually occurred. So we have a better understanding of like conditions that need to be monitored, whatever. If you only built half the project, then, that would potentially alter how our compliance team would look at things, or whatnot. Does that make sense? I think we talked about this before, but okay. I think that's it. So before we go to, I didn't think we're going to be here for 3 hours. Does anybody else have any other thoughts that they saw or didn't see, or that they were hoping to see? Yeah, I noticed, Irene, you submitted some comments shortly before this meeting, and I did look through them.
Some of them were already changed in this.
Yeah, some of them were
most
addressed, hopefully,
recently.
but yeah, there were some others that potentially weren't. So go ahead and.
The
go
other
ahead and,
comment I was gonna make is, once the red line Xing out, all that, I do think that, at least I found the revision before this, it was at least easier for me to understand what it was your intent was. So I think that's a really good thing, when someone can understand what it is you're trying to do, whether you agree or disagree with it. At least I could tell the direction you were going. So thank you.
One of the things that I'm going to do before we go to the next phase, is I will submit to the RAC sort of a final proposed draft. And in that draft, I will make comment bubbles for each change, explaining what the thinking is. So, this moved up here, or we took this out because, X or whatever. And you will be able to sort of look at the comment bubble like, oh, this is what this is trying to do. I wasn't as concerned about that for this meeting because we're literally walking through it right here, but that should hopefully help you aid in a sort of final review of the rules.
I would also like to see a clean copy of, this is what the rule will look like, without the underlining in red. I mean, I know you have to do that for the
Yeah,
public,
you can.
but
You can go in here and you can say under the track line, where is it? Under review. Oh yeah, markup. You can say, if you click markup in Microsoft Word and you say simple markup, it sort of shows you, this is what it would look like if you accepted all the changes. So it doesn't accept all the changes. You can go back to all markup again. But if it's sort of like, you're looking at something that's got a zillion changes and you just can't even read it, like this one here, you go to simple markup and it all shrinks down to, this is what final text would look like.
Okay.
And then on the left here, you see the red lines, and that shows you there's a change in this paragraph. You can't see it because we're in simple markup, but that's where the change is. Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity on the proposed draft language that you have on the slide right now. So when the timing of what's proposed for the updated project description.
Yes, let me go I put it in this here. Let me go to the track changes. So we just added this text here, this B. So no more than 90 days after the deadline for completing construction of the facility, the certificate holder must submit a report on the final facility design to the department, which basically would describe the facility, how much you built it out, if there are any missing components that were not in the original facility design, and map some geospatial data.
Yeah, I see. Okay, I was just getting that mixed in with the construction amendment deadline. So this is just reporting after completion of
Hey, the
construction,
deadline's passed. This is what we actually did. Great.
Yeah,
we'll update your thingy. Got it.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that includes all the GIS info and as-builts.
Yep.
Such
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think we have anybody from the public here, so I guess opening it for public comment doesn't accomplish much. So I'm going to skip that slide unless I'm missing somebody. But I don't see anybody with their hands up. So let's go through next steps here. So I'm gonna, upload this video for you all and the public to review. If you want to go back and remind yourselves what I went through or spoke about. I'm going to, initially I was thinking I would just say, okay, submit some comments, and you can do that. But actually, let's go ahead and do that. So by May 9th, if you have any additional thoughts or concerns about what we spoke about, Irene, if you could sort of retype up, okay, based on the conversation we had at the RAC meeting, here are still my concerns. Here's the things I'm still worried about. So I know if we've taken some stuff off the table for you, you can let us know what you still have an issue with. I'll take that feedback and I will generate sort of potential notice of proposed rulemaking draft with comments, explaining sort of thinking that'll maybe hopefully help your review. And then based on that, in lieu of having another RAC meeting, I'm just going to have you guys look at that and say, no, it looks good, or no, we still have some issues with that, and we may or may take that and tweak it some more. But I would then take that draft, file a notice of proposed rulemaking. If you still had some concerns that you feel like we didn't address, you could make them during the public comment period process. But then that would sort of starting roughly 90-day clock on these rules being final.
I doubt
Does
we'll
anybody
need
have-
another meeting. I don't think we'll need another meeting.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't think anybody else wants one. So if you don't want one, I'm going to take that to the bank. No, I don't think we need one. I think these changes overall are pretty good. And hopefully are well received by all. I know not everything in here is necessarily what everybody would want, but I do think, I feel like once we put these into place, that the process will be better understood by the public and also easier to implement. And so I guess the proof will be in the pudding. But just like we updated these rules 5 years ago and are making changes now, if we messed up anywhere, there'll be another rulemaking. So we're always trying to improve the process. So any questions or thoughts about this? I will send an email sort of, pinging people and letting them know, especially for those who didn't show up today, what the schedule or the timeline looks like. So you don't have to remember anything I just said, but go ahead, David.
Oh, no, I was just so May 9th is the last R, which is the end of next week, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Or at the start
Yeah.
of, anyway, end of next week.
It's a week
sometime.
from Friday. So basically, it's, a
week.
little under 2 weeks. If you could just kind of go through this, and then I'm going to take that feedback and really try to make the most polished, bestest version of the rules I can for public comment.
Yeah, okay. Because the one thing that just as a musing I'll want to piece together is what Irene has talked about is what's in the legislation, what's in the ledge, and how that interacts with the rules. That can often, create a difference in what we agree or think is good or not.
There's like the construction timeline and there's the appeal path. the rules won't mention anything about the appeal path. They didn't before, and they won't in the future. So that sort of isn't going to change. The construction timeline, I'd just insert a sentence in here to reflect whatever the legislation says. But we don't intend to file the rules until the legislative session is over. So we're going to sit on this, but I just want to get us as close to final as we can so that when that does land, we can just kick this baby out and be done with it. Patrick, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, two thoughts. One, the legislation also says that you don't have to do an amendment if you are changing a site boundary, but council would then adopt rules that would address what it would take to approve a revised site boundary. So if that passes, we would probably, that could impact what we've done in these rules, and we would instead just address site boundary revisions in separate rules. My second thought is on the last rule, Tom, that you just showed about updating as-built to show the 2680. Could you scroll down to the bottom? Because I want to make sure that David and others who are on the developer side see that whole rule. The intent of this rule is really and it goes even further down than that. One, it's been difficult for our enforcement team when they go out on site and what's in a site certificate isn't what's reflected on the ground. And so that's one of the purposes, to make sure that our enforcement folks have a site certificate that actually reflects what's on the ground. And along with that purpose is, let's say originally you came to the council and you said, I'm going to build, let's say it's a wind turbine facility, and you say, I'm going to build 100 turbines, and council approves you to do that, but you end up only building 90. Now that site certificate would be revised to reflect 90, and you would no longer be authorized to build 10 more, 5 years later. So I want to make sure you understand that would be an effect of this change.
Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but you already are prescribed from building 10 more once the construction deadline is passed. It's just now the site certificate would reflect that. So it's we're not taking anything away. It's just the site certificate reflects your sort of rights, as it were.
And the way this rule is drafted, at least, is that we could make that change without having to do an amendment. So it would just be an administrative change reflecting what has been built. So take a closer look at that, and to the extent that you have comments on that rule, let us know your thoughts.
Andrew?
Yeah, one comment and maybe even a question for Patrick is, for those of us that operate under TSS or TSA regulations, and us we're not able to have that information out to the public for security purposes under the pipeline rules. I don't know if any language needs to be added to that section to address that, but that's something that I think would be a concern for those that are on the regulated side of the utilities, to make sure that that information isn't being either obtained in the public realm in any way, or being used nefariously, or being sent out via public records request, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and you would flag that for us and we handle that type of stuff like we do any document that is asserted to be confidential. Flag it as confidential. Identify why under what public records rule you think it covers it, and then we will treat that as such. But if we then get a public records request, then what happens is we analyze it and we say, okay, is this assertion of confidentiality, trade secret, whatever it might be, do we believe in it? And if we agree, then we would withhold the document, and then the public has a right to challenge that being withheld, and then it goes through the appeal process. But it's your burden to identify what you think is confidential and why, and then that gives the department the ability to analyze whether or not we agree.
Patrick, is there any way for us to get confirmation on that prior to a FOIA request? I just see our legal team, to meet the TSA requirements, wanting to get confirmation up front before we give that information out.
Well, we would treat it confidential. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you say, we could tell you whether or not we agree. I could tell you whether I agree, but what comes with the next step in the process is if the public makes a request and they appeal the department's position, the first step is then it goes to a separate group within the Department of Justice, and they analyze the assertion that the party claiming confidentiality made, what the department said, and what the member of the public is saying. I can't tell you what they would say, because they won't analyze it until the public has made its argument.
Understood, but that's good to know that there's a process like that, and that way you can be prepared for that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Any other?
Tom, I had one. And yeah, this is a follow-up, and maybe Patrick, that was helpful. Your last note on kind of what to look at for this section. Working on behalf of a lot of developers, one of the biggest requests that we often get on the consulting side is working on a site certificate that maintains, as much flexibility as possible. And so I just wanted to clarify if this change, let's think of like a solar facility where we're often working within the concept of a box, and there's a lot of pieces of that solar facility that might change up into when groundbreaking occurs. Is the idea here that once that facility is developed, you're essentially letting go of, if there's portions of the site that you had permitted previously that aren't being used? I guess for me, it's just important to make sure I understand how this might affect
Sure. So the way
how the sites are I'll stop there, but
you're obliged to submit this, I call it an as-built report, after you've completed construction. All right. So if you have phased construction and you've already told us you're doing phased construction, then this report and your kind of final as-built report isn't due to us until you tell us, now we're done. Okay, we're done constructing it. But once you do say, okay, we're done, and you originally had told us council had originally approved X and you haven't built to X, your site certificate is now going to reflect what you actually built when you tell us you're done.
Okay. So
just
go ahead, David.
Sorry. No, I need to use real examples, because we can say that we're doing phased approach, and we often always say we're doing phased approach. We don't know how many phases or whatever at the very start of all of this. And so with the legislation, if that passes, we've got 6 years. We got 6 years to build whatever's on there. And as soon as the 6 years is up, we have to provide you within 90 days, and we lose all the other, or do we? Because what we've often done is, even with phases, because we have to amend the site certificate, because for at least us, and I'm sure lots of others, each phase is its own LLC, its own, and we ring fence it, we finance it, we do everything like that. Then we amend for the remaining portion of, is just the remaining portion of the site. And then hopefully we build maybe 1 or 2 more phases. This doesn't limit us if we amend as well, right? Because we can bifurcate. We often bifurcate, and then that does become the end of, and we within 90 days show you a as built of what we've built. But we're also in the process of amending, of bifurcating the other portions of the site. Or does that really limit us? Because that could be a very big thing.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, and I think what you're saying is, let's say you'll be approved for a large facility, and then you'll come back and you say, we want to split this into separate site certificates. Is that the scenario you're describing?
Yeah, we don't say that. We build the first portion that we get contracted with, and then the way we've done it in the past is we bifurcate. At the very beginning, we often say, like the first site certificate, we'll say, we're anticipating probably 2 to 3 phases, or let's say 3 phases. But you don't know what those phases are 4, 5, 6 years out, right? Of when you're doing your construction and how the market's going to come together, and your transmission and everything else that goes along with development of sites. And so it's kind of what you were saying, but it's also what I really like is the reverse of this. Is if you have a site and we phase it, then the bifurcation is an administrative thing because all the same rules apply. Because that's in a sense what you're saying. Yeah.
I don't know that I'm going to be addressing what your concern is, because I'm not entirely clear on what it is. But I can tell you what the intent of the rule is, which is what I said a moment ago. The intent is to make sure that when we go out to inspect a facility, what is stated in the site certificate is what is on the ground. That is the difficulty that we've been having from an enforcement standpoint, is we ask our enforcement team to go out and make sure you're in compliance with your site certificate, but the site certificate describes components that have not been built. And so what we need to make sure is that the site certificate reflects what has been built.
Okay, this could be a bigger issue than you might realize. So thanks for bringing it up. Like it's massive.
Which is why I'm flagging
because
it.
we,
And to the extent if you see language that is going to be problematic for you, let us know and help us understand why.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yeah. The reason why I'm saying that is because we build the first phase and that becomes its own project, but it takes longer than 90 days to bifurcate. If we have to bifurcate and create a new site certificate with a new LLC for the remainder of the site. And so,
and you're saying at that point, at the point in time that you're describing right now, has the entire facility been built? It sounds like
no.
It has not. All right.
No,
so
I see your point. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
If the entire facility hasn't been built yet, then I don't think that you would even have to submit that report yet. But look at that language, and if there's something that will get you more comfortable, let us know.
Okay, I get what you're saying now.
So Sarah and I talked about this with our RFA 13 that we've got. There's a potential for aspects of it to not be built, but we're not operating, there won't be a change in LLC or anything like that, no change. So there'll be no amendment, but what it'll do is give us an opportunity to sort of circle back with everybody and the council and staff to ensure that they understand what we built and what we didn't build, so that when they do come out on site and like Patrick has said and say, hey, I'm looking for this power line alignment you had in your sites, your amendment 13, and we're like, no, we didn't build it. We got service from the utility over here, that there's not a non-compliance issue there for everybody to try to resolve later on. So that it's just sort of trues up everything. And then that way it's much easier for us to go back and look at things, because, Sarah and Kathleen and I are dealing with things that are 20 years old that I wasn't even around for, that we're trying to, just get documentation on, that we've been struggling to get for the last 4 or 5 years. So that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to solve here, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick and Andrew. Yeah, we'll have to really think through this, because it also seems disingenuous to say we're finished that phase of the project and not give you your as-builts, because if they come out, they'll only really be looking at what was built. So it's a bit of both here. And I get the concept that if you have a larger site certificate, you still haven't built your other phases, that technically the report might not be due, but that might not necessarily fix this problem for your guys.
It sounds like to me, maybe the good thing to do is, if you're filing amendments to change ownership, but you're not changing the project itself, to make sure that the application for ownership change includes that. And so that it documents through the process
Yeah.
that this section isn't required for each amendment if nothing's changing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll take a look, but thanks for actually pointing it out, because I
Yeah, and you might
might have
want to,
skipped over that.
you might want to suggest language in the very first, I'm looking at the rule, and can you scroll back up a little bit, Tom? At the beginning of that rule, where we say right there, no more than 90 days after the deadline for completing, well, we say after the deadline for completion of construction. That might be where you want to try to insert some language.
Yeah,
I don't-
completion of or deadline for construction, Tom, for both.
Yeah.
So that we're not having to, you're not waiting on us if we completed a year, it's a 5-year project and we complete it in 1 year, and you're waiting 5 years for us to get our report to you.
Yeah. So another way to think about this is we have rules that dictate, what you can build, which is essentially what's in the site certificate, and when you can build it, which is in the site certificate. And we have rules about, to the extent that you need more time, because whatever, you can seek extensions. Okay. So we're not changing that at all. This is just saying, whenever that process is done, we would like an update. So this is not, the intent of this is not to modify the existing construction schedule at all.
Yeah, I might take a look at this and suggest something, because actually you probably don't want a report 5 years, 6 years after, when we built a phase that is operating, that phase is operating as its own standalone facility. And yes, we're continuing to build other phases, but yeah, so we'll take a look and see, because the concept would be, we need to get you the as-built so that when they come out, this is what was built. They can actually inspect what's built, not what might be built in the future.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I got it now. Thank you.
All righty. So, my email address. I can also reach out if you have questions for, like more legal questions for Patrick. You can send them to me, and I can sort of forward them on to Patrick, and we will discuss and get those answers back to you ASAP. That's all I got. So took a little longer than I thought we would, but actually not too bad. Call that good. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the Eastern Oregon Solar RAC that I've been involved in. I'm like, I don't think I could survive that. 13 8-hour meetings. So I try to keep it tight over here at FSEC. But all right, thank you guys so much. I will keep in touch. I'll send you an email with, I made some little tweaks here, and I add that Rule 80 here isn't in the draft I sent you on Thursday or Friday. So I will send it out right now, so that, David, when you're looking at this, you're like, where did that language go? It's in the draft that you don't have. So go ahead and take a look at that and just get me your feedback in the next few weeks. If I don't hear from you, I'll do my best to polish it up and provide some comments, bubbles, and whatnot for you to look at. But that'll be the addition. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Take
Tom.
care.
Mhm.